Welcome back to the channel. The rain is falling, the lights are low, and you've come to the right place for a story that will both scare you and relax you. Before we dive into the darkness, if you love horror stories, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on all notifications. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy tonight's story, and be sure to comment below with what part scared you the most. Your support means the world. Now, are you ready? Every Boy Scout knows the 3-blast whistle call for help. 1 blast is stop. 2 is come here. 3 means you are lost and in deep trouble. The summer I was 14, at Camp Tanglewood, we learned there was a 4th signal. One that wasn't in the manual. The one that whistles back. Camp Tanglewood was the kind of place that existed in a perpetual state of misty, pine-scented nostalgia. It was a sprawling Boy Scout camp deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. My patrol, the Wolves, was assigned the most remote campsite for our final week-long trip of the summer. Coyote Point, a small clearing on a bluff overlooking a cold, dark lake. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Michael, a loudmouth kid named Chris who thought he was tougher than everyone else, and our scoutmaster, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was the perfect scoutmaster. He was a former Marine, a man who knew everything about knots, compasses, and how to build a fire in the pouring rain. He was the kind of unshakable adult who made you feel completely safe, even in the middle of a vast, dark wilderness. On our first night, as we sat around a crackling campfire, Mr. Henderson told us the local camp legend. It was a cautionary tale he told every new group that stayed at Coyote Point. The story of the Whistler. Decades ago, he said, a scout named Thomas got lost in the woods near this very campsite. A huge storm rolled in, and he wandered off from his patrol. They searched for weeks. All they ever found was his official Boy Scout whistle, lying in the mud near the lake. The legend says his ghost still wanders these woods, forever lost, forever blowing his whistle, trying to lead other scouts astray, to make them lost just like he was. Chris, of course, scoffed at the story. "That's just something you tell little kids to keep them from wandering off," he said. Mr. Henderson just gave him a hard, serious look. "It's a story to remind you to respect the woods, Chris, and to respect the rules." Later that night, zipped into our sleeping bags, the fire reduced to glowing embers, we heard it. A sound that cut through the perfect silence of the forest. It was a single, high-pitched, melodic whistle. It wasn't the sharp, shrill blast of a scout's emergency whistle. It was a human sound, like someone whistling a cheerful, simple tune. It came from deep in the woods on the other side of the lake. "It's just an owl," Chris muttered from his tent, though he sounded less confident than before. Michael and I didn't say anything. We just lay there in the dark, listening. A few minutes later, it came again, closer this time, a simple 3-note melody, repeated twice. Doo-dee-doo, doo-dee-doo. A cheerful, innocent sound that was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. The next day, we were on a compass navigation exercise. A mock get lost and find your way back to camp scenario. Before we started, Mr. Henderson gathered us and went over the whistle signals again, his eyes lingering on Chris. 1 blast, stop and listen. 2 blasts, come to my position. 3 blasts, emergency only. Got it? We all nodded. The exercise was going fine. We were spread out a little, taking our bearings. I was about 100 yards from the others when I heard it. 2 sharp whistle blasts coming from somewhere up ahead, deeper in the woods. Come here. I assumed it was Mr. Henderson signaling us to regroup. I changed my course and headed towards the sound. I walked for 5 minutes, pushing through thick ferns. The woods were silent. There was no one there. Then, from behind me, I heard the familiar, sharp blast of Mr. Henderson's actual whistle. He was back where I had started. I felt a cold jolt of fear. The first signal, the one that I had followed, wasn't from him. It was a mimic. I told him what happened when I got back. He looked concerned, his eyes scanning the silent woods. "Everyone stick close," he said, his voice tight. "The woods can play tricks on your ears." The paranoia set in immediately. Our own safety system, the one thing designed to keep us connected, had been compromised. We couldn't trust the sounds we heard. The whistler, if that's what it was, wasn't just a sad, wandering ghost. It was intelligent. It was tactical. It was trying to separate us. That night, the whistling returned, but it was no longer just a distant melody. It was circling our campsite, a constant taunting presence in the darkness just beyond the firelight. The simple tune had been replaced by complex, almost conversational trills and warbles. It felt like it was mocking us. Chris couldn't take it. He jumped to his feet and yelled into the darkness, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and bravado. "Shut up! Just leave us alone!" The whistling stopped instantly. A heavy, profound silence fell over the woods. We all held our breath. Then, from the darkness, right behind our tents, a voice whispered, a perfect, chilling imitation of Chris's own voice. "Make me." The disembodied echo of Chris's own voice sent a shockwave of pure panic through our camp. Chris stumbled back, his face white as a sheet. This wasn't a ghost whistling a sad tune. This was something malevolent, something that was listening and learning. Mr. Henderson, our unshakable leader, was visibly shaken, but his training kicked in. "Everyone, in your tents, now," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Zip them up and do not come out, no matter what you hear. That's an order." He grabbed the camp hatchet from the woodpile and his most powerful flashlight. "I'm going to find out who's screwing with us," he said, his jaw set. "This ends now." He clicked on his flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a sharp cone into the oppressive darkness, and he walked out of the circle of firelight and into the woods. The 3 of us scrambled into our separate tents, zipping them shut as if the thin layer of nylon could offer any real protection. We sat there in the dark, listening. We could hear Mr. Henderson crashing through the undergrowth, yelling, "Whoever's out there, this isn't funny!" The melodic whistling started again, seeming to dance around him, always just out of his flashlight's reach. It was leading him on a chase, deeper and deeper into the woods. 10 minutes passed, an agonizing eternity. The sounds of Mr. Henderson grew fainter. Then we heard it, the sharp, piercing sound of his official scout whistle. 3 frantic, desperate blasts. Wheat! 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 Help. The emergency signal. The signal our unshakable ex-Marine Scoutmaster should never have had to use. He was lost. He was in trouble. He was calling for us. We were frozen in our tents, completely terrified. Chris started sobbing in the tent next to mine. "It's my fault. I made it angry." Then his sobbing stopped. I heard the sound of his tent zipper being ripped open. "Chris, no! Henderson said to stay put!" Michael yelled. But Chris was gone, consumed by guilt and fear. "I have to help him!" he yelled, and we heard him run off into the darkness, in the direction of the distress call. Now it was just Michael and me. We crept to the front of my tent and peered out through the mesh. The fire was dying, and the woods were a solid wall of black. We could hear Chris shouting for Mr. Henderson in the distance. And then we heard a new, terrifying sound. A duet. Chris's scout whistle blowing frantically, and the whistler's melodic tune weaving around it, mocking it, confusing it. The sounds grew more distant, and then they both stopped. A minute later, a new whistle sound started. A single scout whistle. It was very close to our camp. 2 short, sharp blasts. Wheat! Wheat! Come here. But the sound was wrong. It was weak, watery, and it ended with a horrible gurgling sound, as if it were being blown by someone with a mouthful of water or blood. "Don't move," Michael whispered from the darkness of my tent, his voice trembling. "It's a trap. That's not him." We knew it. The whistler had gotten them, and now it was trying to lure the last 2 of us out into the open. We scrambled to the back of the tent, as far from the entrance as we could get. 2 terrified kids zipped into a nylon coffin. We heard a sound outside, a heavy, slow, dragging sound, as if a full sack of potatoes was being pulled through the dry leaves. It circled our tent once, the sound scraping against the fabric right next to my head. And then it stopped, right in front of our tent's flap. We held our breath, waiting for the fabric to be torn open, for a face to peer in, but nothing happened. The presence just waited, patiently, silently. We stayed like that for the rest of the night, not sleeping, barely breathing, 2 boys locked in a state of pure, primal terror. The silence outside was absolute. As the first faint, gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the feeling of the waiting presence outside finally, mercifully, faded away. We waited until the sun was fully up before we dared to move. I slowly, cautiously unzipped the tent flap, expecting to see something horrific. But the campsite was empty. The fire was a circle of cold, black ash. It was quiet, peaceful. But lying on the ground, right in front of our tent, placed neatly side by side, were 2 objects. One was Mr. Henderson's camp hatchet, its wooden handle worn, its blade clean and glinting in the morning sun. The other was Chris's official Boy Scout whistle,
the one that had been attached to his uniform. But the green plastic was cracked, and the inside of the whistle, the little chamber where you blew, was caked with a dark, dried, brownish-red substance. We were found by park rangers later that day, wandering aimlessly down a trail, unable to speak. A massive, week-long search was launched for Chris and Mr. Henderson. They brought in dogs, helicopters. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing. It was as if the woods had simply swallowed them whole. The official story was that our scoutmaster and one of our patrol members had gotten tragically lost and perished in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. For years, I believed the legend. I believed the Whistler was the ghost of that lost scout, Thomas. But a few years ago, I was helping my parents clean out their attic, and I found my old Boy Scout manual. I sat down and idly flipped through the dusty pages. I found the section on emergency signals. 1 blast, stop. 2 blasts, come here. 3 blasts, help. And then I saw a signal I had completely forgotten, one that was rarely used. 4 short blasts, the signal for all clear, return to camp. And I realized the Whistler wasn't a ghost. It was a predator, and it was using our own rules, our own language against us. 3 blasts from Mr. Henderson, a genuine call for help. Then the wet, gurgling 2 blasts, the Whistler telling something else that the prey was ready to come here. It was a coordinated hunt. But what about the first sound we heard? That simple 3-note melody. Last year, I was watching a nature documentary about the birds of the Pacific Northwest, and I heard it, the exact same tune. The documentary identified it as the call of a northern shrike, a small, unassuming songbird, a bird that's also known by another name, the butcher bird, because of its unique and gruesome habit of impaling its prey on thorns and sharp sticks.
The first rule of exploring ancient sites is look but don't touch. Our venturing crew advisor told us that a dozen times before our trip to Two Crow Canyon. But he never told us what to do if the things you're looking at start looking back. Or worse, if they start to move. I was 16 the summer my venturing crew took a canyoneering trip through the Utah desert. Venturing is like the older, co-ed, more extreme version of Boy Scouts. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Maya, a goofy, energetic guy named Kyle, and our adult advisor, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson was a geology professor, a man of science who loved the desert more than anything. He was leading us on a 3-day trek through a remote, little-known area called Two Crow Canyon. Before we started our hike, we stopped for water at a dusty, isolated trading post on the reservation border. An old Navajo man behind the counter saw the map spread out on the hood of our van. He came outside, his face a mask of deep wrinkles, and pointed a bony finger at the canyon we had circled. "You don't go there," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "That's the crooked man's place." He told us the canyon was haunted by a spirit, an ancient, angry thing trapped in the rock paintings, the petroglyphs.
He walks when the moon is a sliver, the old man warned. He gets lonely. He's always looking for new friends to add to his wall. We thanked him politely, but none of us took it seriously. It was a classic spooky story told to scare tourists. Mr. Peterson even chuckled as we drove away. "Fascinating local folklore," he said. We hiked into the canyon that afternoon. The place was breathtaking, a vast, silent cathedral of red rock and scorching sun. After we set up camp, we found the petroglyph wall the old man had warned us about. It was a massive, sheer cliff face covered with hundreds of ancient drawings chipped into the dark desert varnish of the rock. There were drawings of bighorn sheep, hunters with bows, and swirling geometric patterns. And then we saw it. In a small, isolated section of the wall, away from the other drawings, was a single unsettling figure. It was a stick figure man, about 3 feet tall, but it was different from the simple, classic figures elsewhere on the wall. This one was long, unnaturally thin, and its limbs were bent at sharp, impossible angles, as if every bone in its body was broken. It was deeply unsettling, and the pigment in the carved lines was darker, almost fresh-looking compared to the faded gray of the other ancient art. As the sun began to set, the shadows in the canyon grew long and distorted. I was looking at the crooked stick figure, and I swear I saw it move. For a split second, in the shifting, dying light, its posture seemed to change, its misshapen head now tilted slightly, as if it were looking directly at our campsite. I blinked, and it was just a static, lifeless drawing on the rock again. It had to be a trick of the light.
That night was filled with a strange, oppressive silence. We all had unsettling dreams of thin, sharp, crooked shapes moving just at the edge of our vision. The next morning, the first thing we did was go back to the petroglyph wall, and our blood ran cold. The crooked stick figure man had moved. It was no longer in its isolated section of the rock. It was now at the very edge of the main panel of drawings, standing right next to a carving of a deer. And next to it on the wall, newly scratched into the rock with a sharp, fresh violence, were 4 smaller, cruder stick figures, a perfect, terrifying match for our group of 4.
"This isn't possible," Mr. Peterson whispered, his scientific rationalism completely shattered. He ran his hand over the new carvings. They were fresh, the rock beneath them pale and raw. This wasn't a prank. A new, frantic energy took over our group. We had to leave, now. As we were rushing to tear down our tents and pack our bags, Kyle let out a sharp, pained yelp. "Ow! Something bit me!" We all looked. On the back of his right hand was a thin, perfectly straight, raised red line, like a paper cut. It bleeded slightly. "It felt like a paper cut," he said, confused, looking around at the empty sand and rock. There was nothing that could have scratched him. Before we left, I looked at the petroglyph wall one last time through my binoculars. My heart stopped. The main stick figure man was now back in its original isolated position, but the 4 smaller figures, our figures, were different. The one on the far right, the one that represented Kyle, now had a single, bright red line painted across its hand. The thing on the wall wasn't just watching us. It was a living document. It was updating its terrible painting in real time.
Our hike out of the canyon was a frantic, paranoid race against the setting sun. The friendly, beautiful canyon from the day before now felt alien and hostile. It felt occupied. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. We started to feel things, a sharp stinging sensation, like a paper cut on our arms and legs. Maya cried out, and a long, thin scratch appeared on her cheek, welling up with blood. Mr. Peterson's backpack was suddenly sliced open, a long, clean cut, spilling his gear onto the canyon floor. We were being attacked by something we couldn't see, something razor-thin and impossibly fast. The horror became perceptual, a waking nightmare. The shadows cast by the canyon walls seemed to stretch and bend at unnatural angles, mimicking the crooked limbs of the stick-figure man. As we looked at the sheer, flat rock faces around us, we'd see it, a flicker of movement, a two-dimensional shape, flitting across the stone like a fast-moving insect, always at the very edge of our vision. When we'd turn to look, it would be gone. We weren't being hunted by a creature of flesh and blood. We were being hunted by a concept, a living drawing, a flat, sharp, malevolent idea that could move across any surface, and its edges were sharp enough to cut. It was a being of only 2 dimensions, and it was toying with us in our 3-dimensional world. As the sun finally touched the horizon, we were nearing the mouth of the canyon. The shadows grew incredibly long, stretching across the canyon floor like dark, grasping fingers. Kyle, who was walking in the lead, suddenly stopped dead and let out a strangled scream, his hand pointing at the sheer canyon wall in front of us. On the flat, vertical rock face, cast by the last rays of the setting sun, was a shadow, a long, thin, impossibly sharp, and horribly familiar shadow of the crooked stick-figure man. But when we looked around, there was no object, no person there to cast it. The shadow was the thing, and it was flowing across the rock directly towards us. We scattered in pure animal panic. The shadow, that ribbon of animate darkness, flowed over the spot where Kyle had been standing. He let out a single, sharp, horrible cry that was cut off with a sound like a wet slice. And then silence. Mr. Peterson, Maya, and I just ran. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We scrambled out of the mouth of the canyon and into the twilight. The impossible image of that shadow predator burned into our minds. We got to our van and drove, not stopping until we reached the lights of the nearest town and the tribal police station. We tried to tell our story, the words tumbling out in a hysterical, nonsensical mess. The old, weary Navajo officer listened with a sad, patient expression. He was not surprised. He told us the legend was true. The crooked man, he said, was an ancient spirit, a being of pure malice. Centuries ago, powerful medicine men had trapped it, not in the rock, but as the rock. They had flattened its existence, confining it to 2 dimensions. It cannot leave the canyon, the officer said, his voice low. It can walk on any surface the canyon shadow touches. It is a lonely thing. It is always looking for new figures to add to its story on the wall, to populate its flat, empty world. He marks you, and then he collects. A massive search was launched for Kyle. They found nothing. His backpack, his gear, everything was gone.
He had simply vanished from the face of the earth. It's been 10 years. I never went back to the desert. I thought I had escaped, that the horror was contained in that one cursed canyon. I moved to the city, surrounded myself with tall buildings and crowds of people, a world as far from that empty red rock as I could get. Last night, I was working late in my high-rise office building. I was on the 20th floor. I stood at the window, watching the sunset. The long shadows of the skyscrapers were stretching across the city, a moving grid of darkness. As the shadow of my own building fell across the flat brick face of the building opposite mine, I saw it. For just a split second, a flicker of movement on the bricks. A familiar, impossibly thin, crooked silhouette flowing across the wall, a two-dimensional nightmare in a three-dimensional world. It was no longer alone. It was holding hands with a second, smaller stick figure. The canyon shadow can stretch a long, long way, and the crooked man is still collecting. For my Eagle Scout project, I had to survive alone for 3 days in the Spatterlight Swamp. They call it that because of the ghost lights, the will-o'-the-wisps that dance over the water at night. The scoutmaster told me the lights were just swamp gas. Swamp gas doesn't steal your compass. To earn my Eagle Scout rank, I had to complete a final major challenge, a 3-day solo survival trip. I was 17, cocky, and felt like I was the next Bear Grylls. I chose the Spatterlight Swamp in southern Louisiana. It was notoriously difficult to navigate, a maze of murky water, cypress knees, and suffocatingly thick Spanish moss. It was the perfect place to prove my skills. Before I set out, my scoutmaster, Mr. Davies, gave me my final briefing. He pointed to a section of the map. "You'll be camping on this hummock," he said, indicating a small island of dry land deep in the swamp. "Now, you'll see the lights at night, the spatter lights. Local legend calls them corpse candles, says they're the souls of drowned men trying to lure you into the bog." He gave me a wink. "It's just swamp gas, of course, methane pockets igniting, but they can disorient you. Trust your compass, not your eyes. Got it?" I nodded, feeling a thrill of excitement. I wasn't afraid of ghost stories. The first day was tough but rewarding. I navigated to the hummock, set up my tent, and made a small, clean camp. The isolation was profound. The only sounds were the buzzing of insects and the soft, gurgling sounds of the swamp. As dusk fell and the world was painted in shades of deep purple and black, I saw them. In the distance, over the dark, still water, faint orbs of bluish-green light began to appear. They bobbed and weaved, dancing silently in the darkness. They were beautiful, hypnotic. I watched them for an hour, completely mesmerized. They didn't feel threatening. They felt magical. I finally crawled into my tent, feeling a strange sense of peace. I was woken in the middle of the night by a sound I couldn't place. A soft, metallic click, click, click just outside my tent. My heart started to pound. I slowly unzipped the tent flap, just a crack, and peeked out. My blood ran cold. One of the glowing orbs, about the size of a softball, was floating just a few feet from my camp. It was hovering silently, its eerie green light pulsing gently right over my backpack. As I watched, paralyzed, the light seemed to intensify for a moment, bathing my gear in its glow. Then, as silently as it appeared, it floated away, disappearing back into the darkness of the swamp.
The next morning, I tried to convince myself I had dreamt it. It was too strange, too impossible. The swamp playing tricks on a tired mind. I got up and started to prepare for the day's main task, a circular hike to practice my navigation skills. I reached into the side pocket of my backpack to get my compass. It was gone. I frantically emptied the entire pocket. Nothing. I searched the whole backpack, then the entire campsite. The compass was gone. The pocket it had been in, a zippered pocket, was slightly unzipped. I remembered the sound I'd heard. Click, click, click. The sound of a zipper pull tapping against itself. The light had taken my compass. This changed everything. I was no longer a confident survivalist. I was a lost kid, miles from civilization, in a swamp I couldn't navigate, being targeted by something I didn't understand. My training kicked in. If you're lost, stay put. I decided to stay at the camp and wait. The second night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even build a fire, afraid its light might attract them. I just sat in the dark, my back against a cypress tree, watching the distant, dancing lights with a growing sense of dread. Around 2 a.m., I saw one of them detach from the main group and float silently towards my island. I scrambled behind the tree, my heart in my throat. I watched as the glowing orb drifted over my campsite. Its light was like a soft searchlight, scanning my gear. It hovered for a moment over my small stainless steel cooking pot. The light intensified, and I heard a low vibrational hum. The pot lifted a few inches into the air, held by some unseen force inside the light. Then the orb floated away, carrying my pot with it, a tiny glowing thief in the night. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The lights weren't spirits. They weren't malicious. They were collectors. They were attracted to shiny, metallic, reflective objects. My compass, my cooking pot. I took a frantic mental inventory of everything I had that shined. My belt buckle, my survival knife, the foil wrapper on my emergency chocolate bar, the metal grommets on my hiking boots. I was a walking, breathing treasure chest, and these things were the swamp's silent, glowing magpies. I was now in a primal state of fear. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to strip me of every piece of essential gear. I had to do something. I had to fight back, or at least understand what I was up against. I formulated a desperate, insane plan. I needed to follow one of them back to its source. That night, I took the foil wrapper from my chocolate bar and placed it on a log at the very edge of my island, making sure it was angled to catch the moonlight. Then I hid in a thicket of ferns, a heavy rock in each hand, and I waited. As the last light faded, the ghost lights began their nightly dance. As before, a single orb detached and floated towards my camp, drawn by the bait.
It hovered over the foil wrapper, its light pulsing with an almost excited rhythm. This was my chance. With all my strength, I hurled one of the rocks directly at the light. The rock passed right through the orb. The light didn't disperse. It flickered violently like a broken fluorescent bulb, and it emitted a high-pitched, chittering sound, like 1,000 angry insects. It dropped the foil and shot away into the swamp. But it was different now. It was leaving a faint, phosphorescent green trail in its wake. It was wounded or angry. I didn't hesitate. I ran after it, plunging into the knee-deep, murky water. It was a terrifying, desperate chase through the pitch-black swamp. My only guide, the faint green trail and the angry, chittering sound in the distance. I stumbled over cypress knees, pushed through hanging curtains of Spanish moss, my only thought to keep that trail in sight. The trail led me to a part of the swamp that felt older, darker, and in the center of a large open bog, I saw it. A single, colossal, ancient cypress tree, its trunk wider than a car, its branches bare and skeletal, reaching for the sky like twisted fingers. The entire tree was glowing. It was covered in them, hundreds of the lights, all pulsing and bobbing gently, clinging to the branches like strange luminous fruit. And woven into the very structure of the tree was a massive, horrifying nest. It was made of mud, moss, and a century's worth of stolen, shiny things. Old belt buckles, tarnished silver pocket watches, hundreds of shotgun shell casings, fishing lures, and there near the top, glinting in the collective, eerie green glow of the lights, were my stainless steel cooking pot and my compass. I crept closer, my boots sinking into the soft mud. I could see the source now. In the center of the nest, tangled in the branches, was a mass of twisted, glowing, fungal-looking roots. The lights weren't individual creatures. They were extensions of this central, living mass. And tangled in the very heart of the glowing roots, I saw it. A human skeleton, its bones picked clean and stained green, with a rusted official Boy Scout whistle still hanging around its neck. The legend of the lost scout, Thomas, it was real, but he wasn't a ghost who lured people. He was the first victim. He was the anchor of this whole horrible ecosystem. The lights weren't souls. They were the swamp's immune system, its strange, glowing antibodies. And that skeleton was their first prize, the nucleus of their nest. As I stood there, watching in horrified awe, the hundreds of lights began to dim. They started to flow back towards the central root mass, re-emerging with their source. Their collective, chittering hum faded into a deep, expectant silence. It knew I was there. My presence, my warmth, my life, it had disturbed the nest. I ran. I turned and crashed back into the swamp, the water splashing around me. I could hear the lights behind me, no longer silent and dancing, but now moving with a unified, terrifying purpose. The chittering sound returned, a high-pitched roar from 1,000 tiny throats, and the entire swamp behind me was illuminated by their collective, angry green glow. I was cornered at the edge of a wide, deep channel of black, impassable water. It was a dead end. I turned,
my back to the water, as the swarm of lights closed in, their chittering reaching a fever pitch. They were going to add my knife, my belt buckle, and my bones to their collection. In a final, desperate act, I remembered the one shiny thing I had left that I could part with. I ripped the heavy, polished metal buckle from my belt. "This is what you want, isn't it?" I screamed at the approaching swarm. "You want shiny things? Take it!" I threw the buckle with all my might, sending it spinning high across the dark channel of water. The swarm of light stopped its advance. It hovered for a split second, a single, unified intelligence. Then, as one, the entire swarm shot across the water, a silent, green comet chasing the glint of the thrown buckle. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I ran in the opposite direction, parallel to the water's edge, my legs and lungs burning with the last of my strength. I ran until the swamp began to thin, until I finally stumbled onto the main hiking trail just as the first rays of the sun were breaking through the trees. I was found by a park ranger a few hours later, a shivering, mud-covered, incoherent mess. They said I was suffering from severe dehydration and hallucinations. They sent a search team into the swamp. They never found the giant cypress tree. They never found the nest. Years later, I became a geologist, driven by a need to understand the strange corners of the natural world. I was reading a scientific journal when I saw an article that made my blood run cold. It described a newly discovered species of bioluminescent fungus, Mycena lux coacta, which translates to light-gathering fungus. It was found in only one place in the entire world, the Spatterlight Swamp. The article noted the fungus had a strange, unexplained affinity for concentrating metallic and reflective elements. The final sentence of the paper read, "Further research is required to understand the symbiotic relationship between the fungus and the unusually high concentration of metallic trace elements found in the human skeletal remains discovered at the core of the primary colony."